This is Generation Space, the official podcast of Air Force Space Command.
Hey, welcome to the next episode of Generation Space. I'm Staff Sergeant Dennis Hoffman.
And I'm Ashley Palacios.
And we're going to be jumping into the exciting world of space safety. And we got a couple experts here, and I want them to introduce themselves.
So I'm Major Daniel Mooney. I am the Operations Space Safety Branch Chief down at the Air Force Safety Center in Kirtland Air Force Base.
And I'm Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Wheeler, and I'm the Chief of Space Safety here at Air Force Space Command.
And before you click away, we're not going to be doing any sort of safety brief right now. So don't worry if you didn't grab your reflector belt or your helmet or your knee pads or anything like that. We're going to be jumping into some really exciting aspects of safety that honestly probably goes overlooked largely in the space community and the Air Force community as a whole. So, what is space safety?
You kind of hit the nail on the head there. When I got the assignment to go down to Kirtland Air Force Base to take over as the branch chief, first thing I said when I read the assignment was, Safety Center, what the heck is that? Never heard of it. Which, as a major in the United States Air Force, is maybe something that I probably should have heard of before. And I think that might be perhaps indicative of the culture that we have, and that's part of what I'm working to try to influence as the branch chief. And I've traveled to Vandenberg, I've gone to Patrick, I've gone to Peterson, and I've been to international space safety conferences. I've been to space safety conferences that are here locally, and I ask everyone to give a raise of hand if they've ever heard of the Air Force Safety Center and if they understand what space safety is and what we do, and most of the time I get crickets. I've been to Space 100 where I've briefed them, the students there, and they have no idea what it is, and so we're working diligently to try to build in part of the training curriculum at 533rd Training Squadron to get education in space safety at the entry point to the career field. And so that is a long way to start off, just to say that there is definitely a growth opportunity and growth potential there. So what it is I'll start with what it is not.
Okay.
It is not slips, trips, and falls. It's not occupational safety. It's not flight safety. The Air Force Safety Center and Air Force safety and mission in general has different operational aspects to it. There's the flight safety, there's the occupational safety, there's weapons safety, and then there's space safety. And when you look at the mission of the Safety Center, it's to, first and foremost, protect the airmen, but also preserve the weapon systems and the combat capability that they provide. And it's more in the latter, that's the spirit that we're in, is about making sure that the systems, whether they be the rockets or the satellites or the ground-based systems which make those space system, the orbital space system segment, function for the terrestrial effect that we're trying to achieve, work for the design that was intended. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a reaction wheel fail 5 years into a 10-year mission and it takes your mission down permanently, you probably want to figure out why. You probably want to perhaps redesign that system so that it doesn't fail prematurely in the future. And that's really more what the mission is about. A lot of people will say, well, what you're talking about is mission assurance. And I'd submit to you, yes, it is mission assurance. Mission assurance, when you look at the Venn diagram overlap, right? It's not this, it's not mutually exclusive either, right? You've got safety and mission assurance, and when it comes to space safety, there's a lot of overlap there. So that's probably the most complete answer I could give for you right now.
Well, what do you have to add to that, Colonel?
So essentially, from my perspective here at Air Force Space Command, of course, we have the responsibility to actually organize, train, and equip the actual people who are out there in the space wings doing the mission and making sure they establish a space safety program in order to be able to do it effectively and do it well. Essentially, the way that we look at space safety, at least in my office, is we kind of divide it up into a couple of segments, and that pretty much covers the entire life cycle of the weapon system. You can start off with space system safety. Back when you're first designing the space vehicle, whether it's going to go into orbit or whether it's ground equipment or a rocket, you want to make sure that it's designed in a safe and secure way. So that first of all, you don't want it to fail, and if it does, it fails in a safe way. So it doesn't hurt anybody, it doesn't damage anything that's not supposed to. So that's the first item of that. Then, of course, you have launch and range safety. That's actually that operation of launching the rockets, getting things into orbit, and doing those things, which is probably the most hazardous operation the Air Force does outside of nuclear weapons. I mean, the explosive potential of these rockets are orders of magnitude greater than any conventional weapon that we have in the Air Force inventory. So it's really important to make sure we do that safely and we do that well so that we can successfully launch these billion-dollar satellites to get this capability that we need. Then once it's on orbit, making sure that we understand all the hazards on orbit. If things are not working the way they're supposed to, maintaining a safe environment as well through orbital, you're trying to keep orbital debris down and those type of things so we can safely operate there. Also operate our ground equipment safely. And then, of course, reentry and the end of life. And so those are pretty much the categories that we look at when you do space safety. Those are the kind of areas that we're looking at. And a lot of our space wings are organized around one or more of those actual specific missions.
Yeah, and I would add that at our level, a lot of what we do is we write the policies and we assist other policymakers in developing smart data-informed policy at our level. But the safety mission for space does not stop there. It goes down to the operator. It goes down to the airman. And that's a lot of what the reason we wanted to come on today to talk about this is to educate, to let people know that everyone has a responsibility in there to help identify hazards where people may know they're there and haven't said anything, or to keep an eye out to identify hazards that haven't previously been detected, and then God forbid there be an actual mishap or incident which causes damage or injury, that those events are notified so that we can figure out what went wrong to prevent it from happening in the future. And that's really the core mission intent of all of safety for the Air Force, and specifically for space safety.
Wow. It sounds like there's a lot of different layers and a lot of different hats and a lot of different areas of space safety that I don't think people realize are there. And I was actually in safety for 7 years at the Air Force Safety Center, and I feel like I still don't know enough about what space safety is, or have some misconceptions about what it may be. What do you guys find are some of the most common misconceptions about what space safety actually is?
Well, it's kind of like what Benjamin we talked about before. First of all, people, what is space safety? Trips, falls, we don't run satellites into each other, which is important.
Right.
Okay, if you don't want to do that, want to keep that safe. But like you mentioned, there's a lot more than that. It's mostly along the lines of mishap prevention and mishap investigation. And once again, the mishap investigation, if something does go wrong, we got to find out why it is so we can feed that back into the mishap prevention. And that's what it's mostly about. It's mostly about making sure that our people and our equipment and the environment is preserved so that if we ever need to go to war, or if we ever need those capabilities, they're there, they're available. If we're having mishaps, if people are being injured, that's a readiness issue. That's an issue that impacts the warfighter unnecessarily. So that's what we're about, trying to identify those areas where things can go wrong, and then figure out, okay, if they did go wrong, or when they go wrong, based on Murphy's Law, so they will go wrong, how can we make sure that we're protected, that we minimize the amount of damage, minimize the amount of impact, so that we can successfully carry on the mission.
Yeah, to add to that, I would say the biggest misconception I run into is the idea that safety is only when human life is at risk, and it doesn't involve the mission in and of itself, and that is purely an acquisition function. And while the solution to those risks and those hazards in the system are mostly an acquisition function, that really is a safety issue to figure out. What is the widget? Where was the golden BB that either blew up the rocket? That's the thing you're going to see on the news, right? And history is replete with examples from across industry of when you have a system you're designing. My uncle used to work for. He worked for Chrysler for 27 years, and he always told me, Dan, never buy a first model year car, because there are other problems in the car that the engineers haven't figured out yet. And you can look at the development of the ICBM as a prima facie example of that: failure after failure after failure after failure, and then a success, and then a couple successes, and then another failure. And it goes on this way. And you go from having a high failure rate to a low failure rate. And you can look at the development of the jet engine in aircraft, going from props to jet engines. You had a high spike in failure rates early on. That is safety, figuring out how do we prevent that from happening in the future? So we're not putting lives at risk, and we're also not losing the opportunity cost of the dollars we spend to develop these systems when we instead have to redevelop the same system, right? We could have gone and built a better system instead of fixing the system we already tried to get right in the first place. So there are a lot of gains for the mission monetarily and otherwise from doing this space safety mission. And so I would... that's all I got.
Yeah, so I had a question, right? So, former Secretary Wilson talked about innovate. Chief of Staff wants us to move faster, move smarter, right? How do we do that when you guys have to be not only investigators, but then you have to be teachers, then you have to be forward thinkers, and then you also have to be retroactive problem solvers and look at the things that are on orbit or kind of the anomalies that are happening, and again push that to the next generation of everything that we're lifting into orbit or sending off the Earth. Mm-hmm. How do you guys move faster and be smarter while taking on so much that honestly, again, that not a lot of people know about? So they don't know that you have to do all this stuff. How do you move faster? How do you move smarter?
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think a lot about that is safety is about getting out there, and that's a big part of that. I mean, if we're just always in our office doing our work at our computers, I mean, some of that has to be done, but really, if we want to be effective at safety, we got to get out there. The people have to know us. They have to know that it's important, and we have to know them, their mission, what are the things that they're dealing with. And I think that's a big part about becoming more effective and more efficient is actually building those relationships between the safety office and between the operators and the acquisition people and between industry, and then even within the government. If we've got the FAA who's overseeing commercial space launch at our launch ranges, and NASA and the other government agencies, the NRO, what might it be? And so that's where it really happens. It's like building those relationships and understanding the various missions will then give you the insights you need to identify where those areas are that, hey, we can probably do a better job in these parts to do it more safely, to be more efficient, or to be able to understand, okay, maybe we do have some too much margin in these areas that maybe we can get better bang for the buck by doing things a little bit differently, but still maintain a safe system. So those are the type of areas that the challenge that we have.
Okay. Yeah, I would say we're in a very dynamic time in space, and as you just saw yesterday, the Senate passed the National Defense Authorization Act, and the House will be voting on that in July, and both houses of Congress have a provision in there for the separation of the space mission to its own service. And so that's a very exciting time. That hasn't happened in 70 years, 3 generations. So I feel like we're very fortunate to be in this position where we're going to be at the forefront of the birth of a new service. And so with that comes a lot of challenges and opportunities for growth. So when we look at the way the space mission is going to change into the future as we work closely with the Office of Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Air Force for Space Policy on compliance issues for the FAA taking control of launches on the Air Force ranges and figuring out, okay, so if that public safety mission that we're currently doing, when we analyze thousands of runs to figure out is that launch going to be in compliance, is it going to go over Titusville and kill Aunt Betty? We don't want that to happen, so we need to make sure that we're within margins, right? And that's where we've got go, no-go authorities there.
Right.
As we work to transition that over to the FAA, we're working closely with them to make sure that all those safety stakeholders are transferred in. And so things like that and orbital debris mitigation practices that we're working closely with NASA and the State Department and the intelligence community to make sure that the policies for the future are being set up that my daughter and her children are going to have safe access to space, that we're not going to be in a debris-cluttered environment where you're only going to be able to operate in the first 500 kilometers where drag self-cleans the environment. And above that, sorry, our generation's ruined it for everyone. Yeah. We really want to avoid that, right? So we're working closely to try to do those things.
Awesome. Yeah, so I know Ashley and I spoke before. One thing that we definitely wanted to hit was the relationships, and I know she probably had a more focused question on that. Yeah.
Well, so you guys have been talking about all of the different agencies and organizations and all of the different people that you have to work with in order to get the space safety mission done. So I'm curious about what more industry partners are you working with, and how are you building in their best practices? I'm also really curious how you guys work within other Air Force career fields. Who are you having to collaborate with? Who are you having to talk with in order to get the mission done? Because I think a lot of times people think that safety is its own little bubble, that you guys operate just on your own, the rules and regulations, and that's what you guys are following. But it sounds like you mentioned relationships. that's a huge part of how you guys get the space safety mission done. So can you guys tell us a little bit more about that and who you're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mentioned before, it is really about building those relationships, because ultimately we don't want to be a roadblock to do any sort of space mission. We want to be an enabler. We want to make sure that we're there on the ground level, so we can, like I mentioned, we're identifying those areas. Okay, what can go wrong? How can we keep it go wrong? How can we mitigate those dangers? And so they can be designed in, and they can work on that at the very get-go. So we're more of an enabler than a roadblock, as far as making this so that we can accomplish this very dangerous mission that we're doing. And to do that, like I said, it is building those relationships within the government. I'm actually one of the tri-chairs on the Common Standards Working Group that is formed between the Air Force, the FAA, and NASA. Okay. And the whole purpose of that organization is to identify, okay, we've all got our own safety regulations between all our agencies. We all do have slightly different needs, but where can we find commonality? Where can we make sure we can streamline these regulations so that we can enable the commercial launch providers when they launch from our ranges or NASA's ranges, that they know what's expected of them. They don't, what from launch to launch, know what to expect. They can predict and understand, how to run their business, and so we can do. That's the form that we can do that, and it's pretty much open. It's not just us three. It's not just the Air Force, NASA, and FAA. I mean, we invite the NRO there. We invite the Navy, the Army, any other government agency that needs or that works in space, so they can be aware of these issues and also just raise other issues as things come up and say, hey, we had this issue over here. Maybe this is something we should address, or maybe we should, your standard says this, our standard says this. Is that the right standard? Right. Should we change them? And it gives an opportunity to be able to work through those things and make sure that we can improve that.
Yeah, so really getting those best practices in there, and who's doing what best, and how can we make this the best?
Exactly. We saw this at this range. Have you seen that at that range? And so it's a great forum to be able to communicate across all the government ranges to understand how we can do this and how we can do this better and make sure we're more efficient.
And speaking about kind of leveraging best practices, Major, I know you're kind of the resident expert on this this ASAP program, or the what does it stand for?
Yeah, the Airman Safety Application.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Just shameless plug right there. So we leverage that from the flight community, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it was born out of the flight community, and what we're talking about is the Airman Safety Awareness Program, and there's an app you can download that you can make reports, you can notify of hazards. So this is a way that we can get real-time or close to real-time notification and of events happening, and those notifications will go directly to the MAGCOMs. We'll triage those events to figure out what to do with them, and that is something that's not only an application. You can go on the internet and go to safety.af.mil, and from there we're expanding that out from not only the flight but all aspects of safety to include space safety, and the Navy has also picked up on that, so they're now taking our program and running with it. It's a pretty well-matured application at this point, so I encourage everyone to go download it and keep their eyes open and do good space safety stuff.
Yeah, no, we were talking the other day. It sounds like a popular app right now. I don't know if I can say it out loud, but it's when you're driving, it's a navigational app that you can be like, oh, there's a cop there, except instead of a cop, it's like, oh, here's an anomaly, or here's something crazy going on. I'm going to annotate it in this app, and maybe there's opportunities to do a point system, so it really gets people going. Yeah,
and what we're really trying to do is encourage participation, and so I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that there's a way to do this anonymously, because the safety mission does not just include what happens with the equipment, right? But it also includes people and people's lives and their livelihoods, and we have ways of making that anonymous to encourage reporting, and so I just want to make sure everyone's aware of that.
And I think that goes back to some of the misconceptions about safety in general, that you're not out to get people, you're not out to get them in trouble or to stop them from doing what their job is. It's all about just trying to make it safer for everyone and trying to get us to the goal.
Right, preventing that mishap from happening again in the future, or from happening in the first place. We've got a model called the Swiss cheese model, right? So you've got a layer of protection against a hazard, right? But every slice of Swiss cheese has holes in it, right? So So when you're driving down the road, you've got seatbelts, you've got brakes on your car, you've got airbags, and if
Other
any one of those
drivers.
things fails, right, that's the
Right.
hole in the Swiss cheese where you might have something go wrong. You've got another layer of Swiss cheese. You've got the seatbelt to protect you. Even if your airbag fails, the seatbelt might still protect you. So if all three of those things fail and you're going down the road and all of those holes line up, you might have a
Potential for
mishap,
Right.
right? Yeah. So the idea there is to find where the holes in the Swiss cheese are and turn them into solid cheese.
And it's one of the things about when there is a mishap, and one of the unique things that we have in safety that other like accident investigators don't have is safety privilege. And so when we interview somebody or talk to them, hey, what happened? Often they're very hesitant, am I going to get in trouble? What's going to happen with this? But we can actually provide them what's called safety privilege. It's kind of like the same type of privilege that you have doctor-patient confidentiality or lawyer, that type of thing, that nothing you tell us can be used to then discipline them or can cause any negative effects. The whole point of our investigation is safety, mishap prevention, keeping these from happening in the future. So all the information we get, all the analysis we do from these mishap investigations can only be used for safety purposes. And so that actually is another reason, because the highest levels of government, they've recognized this is so important, that our mission and that being able to successfully complete our mission is necessary from safety. We've got to have a good safety program. So they provided that privileged information.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love the way the conversation is going. Unfortunately, we're coming near the end of our time right now. So I definitely want to allow both of you to kind of recap or state anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important. And then I got a really special question for both of you at the end.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if I have anything to add, it's that the space safety mission is a lot more different than I expected it was going to be when I first got the assignment, that the functions are a lot more dynamic and more integrally involved throughout from the ground level all the way to the operator, from cradle to grave, as they say.
Right.
That space safety really needs to be involved all the way throughout, and it needs to be something that's in the forefront of not only our minds and not only the airmen's minds, but the commanders as well, to make sure that they understand the importance of the mission, which they of course do, and that everyone has cultural buy-in to grow from the ground up a culture of prevention.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been study after study showing that for every catastrophic accident, there's been a certain number of major accidents preceding that. And for every major accident, a certain number of minor accidents. And for every minor accident, so many near misses or anomalies happening. And so if you want to prevent those catastrophic accidents, you start at those near misses, you start at those small accidents.
Yeah.
And that's where really we need the buy-in from the people that are out there in the field. And that's where space safety really comes in. That's what it's really about, getting the people there in the field who are aware of those near misses, that are aware of those minor anomalies or things going wrong, getting their buy-in through the ASAP program or for any other means, working with their safety representative. That's what it's about. And if there's any message, that's why we need them, and that's why it's important.
And when things go wrong, they don't typically go wrong for one reason. They go wrong for a lot of reasons, all going wrong at the same time, like the Swiss cheese model we just talked about. And so getting awareness of the what we get out, the output product of the when things go wrong, the mishaps, you get an investigation and you get recommendations, findings, and those are what go back to the people who can solve the problem to figure out, how do we prevent it from happening in the future. And that's the most important thing that the mission is about.
Absolutely. And hopefully our space operators that are listening right now will take those near misses and start jotting them down more in lieu
Download
of
the app and put it in the app.
going all the way down the road, right? And having to deal with the major stuff. So that was very well put, and I appreciate your guys' time. But I do want to leave with one question, and that's here in the future, because we are the generation of space, there is going to be a time when someone or the Air Force might call on you and say, hey, we need a safety rep on Mars. And we can't guarantee at this point a flight back. Are you ready to accept the challenge of being that safety guy on that colony?
While every TDY I've ever been on has always had a Starbucks on the nearest corner, and there are unfortunately no Starbucks on Mars, it would be a hardship tour, and there's that.
The delivery would probably cost an arm.
Yeah. But anytime the Air Force says go, you go, right? And so that's the mission, and that's what we do. It's what we signed up for. And it would be a unique experience, to say the least.
That's for sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, personally, I'd love that. I mean, one of the things that I got me interested in the Air Force in the first place was the astronaut program and the potential to go to Mars and everything. What a great adventure. But at the same time, I've now got a family, I've got kids, and so I'm sure she probably won't be quite as excited about me going to Mars as I would be. But yeah, what an incredible opportunity that would be.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully Elon Musk gets his act together and figures out how to make a return trip back for us before we have that eventuality, right?
Starbucks, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or breathable atmosphere would be nice too.
Yeah, that too.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't think I've met a space operator that has turned down a trip to Mars yet. So hopefully we can continue the trend. But anyways, thanks everybody for watching this episode of Generation Space. I hope you learned a little bit about space safety, and we'll continue on next time. Thanks so much.